I'm Patrick Carré, VP Commercial Road Transport at the Sectors and Decarbonization Division of Shell.
Admittedly, all would agree, I think, that sectoral decarbonization is key to addressing climate change. But how aligned are industries on this case for change, actually?
I think what is common across all industries and all sectors, and that's really what we find in Shell in different areas, is that in order for decarbonization to really become a success, different parts of the value chain, different players, different actors need to come together. Because very often we're dealing with questions of infrastructure, technology variations, but also incentives where, for example, the regulator comes in.
What is holding us back from this kind of change? I mean, granted, it is a big endeavor, but is it collaboration between different industries and different stakeholders so that we can unlock the solutions we need?
Well, first of all, I think it is something that we've really seen emerging over the last couple of years, and that is societal momentum. I think societal momentum is absolutely the conditio sine qua non, without which nothing can happen. And we see it, I believe, now very clearly with the Paris Agreement, for example, but also with legislations that we see, globally speaking, in different parts of the world, in different countries, and in entities such as the EU. And I think that is really the starting point for everything. So a societal determination, a political will also to drive change. Because the change, as we all know, I think, is massive. It's massive in every respect. It touches consumers, it touches OEMs, it touches infrastructure providers such as ourselves, energy companies, etc. So it's a monumental undertaking that we're talking about, but it can be done. I think that's the key message. What needs to happen for it to be successful is that these players that I just mentioned do come together and work together. And that also the regulator is clear about the important role that the regulator plays by, for example, creating a level playing field for technologies, but also creating an incentive to decarbonize, which will then enable OEMs, customers, but also infrastructure providers and energy companies like ourselves to work together to provide CO2 or non-zero emission or zero emission solutions.
Could you go a little deeper into how far that will go? Again, the regulations, but also the incentives to drive decarbonization?
Yeah, I think it will go a long way, because I think we are talking, of course, about in all of the sectors, we're talking about economically minded actors. Every consumer at the end of the day is economically minded, as is every company, every participant in this in those different sectors. And we shouldn't be, in my personal view, we shouldn't be forgetful of that. We should be mindful of that. We should be clear about that, because it can work to the advantage of decarbonization if we get it right. And that's exactly where the regulator comes in, because it is obvious that the emission of CO2 has a massive negative effect on society, as we all know, as science proves. And therefore, a tax on CO2 is, as we think, an absolutely necessary way to internalize, some of these negative effects and these costs that exist through carbon. And through internalizing them, we create in the same time incentives for OEMs, for infrastructure providers, but also for end customers to take the right, in inverted commas, if you will, decisions. The right meaning decisions that will allow for the development and the use of zero or at least lower emissions in the first stage technologies. So a practical example would be, if basically the cost of hydrocarbon or hydrocarbon fuels increases, conversely, other technologies, be it LNG, biofuels, hydrogen, become more cost competitive, which of course allows then the investment and the further development of those technologies. So the regulator is playing a very, very, very important role in this. And one thing I want to add to this piece is also, given the players involved, which in many cases are multinational OEMs or other multinational companies that work across a number of different geographies. Of course, in order to accelerate some of this, the ability to scale is critical, for the acceleration of the change. And the ability to scale also depends on, if you will, the regulators, if you will, like as in the EU. I think the EU could be a good example for that, being determined to kind of speak with one voice and be clear and provide clarity around what it wants to do. And Canada, of course, is a large market in its own right, which is at the same time made of different provinces. So what is really important for decarbonization to be effective is that the regulator doesn't just act at the provincial level, at the level of the provinces, but also at the federal level, where a sort of level playing field can be set that then allows solutions to be scaled up.
Let's talk about Canada a little bit more. Obviously, we're a very large and very resource dependent country, at least in terms of our exports. What unique sectoral decarbonization opportunities or challenges do you see in Canada?
Certainly, one thing that comes very clearly to mind when I look at Canada are sectors such as mining, forestry, agriculture, for example. But we also, at the same time, though, if I look at my own area and my own business, which is commercial road transport, we know that, a good 35% of goods in Canada are actually transported by road. So if I take all of that together, at first glance, there seem to be some real opportunities in this combination of sectors. If, for example, I think about the agricultural sector and I think about some of the byproducts of the agricultural sector that could become feedstock for things like biofuels, for example, or other green fuels. So I think a very, very exciting space as far as I'm concerned. And I'm very happy to see that in Canada, Shell in Canada is already moving into territories such as building hydrogen sites, etc. And I see some really good initiatives like the smart transport initiative, etc. That is really going in that direction. So those would be kind of some of the top of mind ideas for sectoral decarbonization in Canada. We've invested in two biofuels projects in Canada, one of them in Quebec, where we really want to create this loop that I was alluding to a little bit earlier, where we have, for example, not limited to, but as an example, agricultural byproducts that we can then turn into biofuels. I think biofuels are really a fascinating space. Why? Because in the short term, they basically build on an existing technology. They build on the internal combustion engine technology, which, as we all know, the OEMs have already developed and almost perfected, one could say. So it is out there. It is in the market. The infrastructure to serve them is in the market. What we need to get right is to lower the CO2 footprint of the fuel. That's where the bio component can come in. And that's why, for instance, making better use, more intelligent use of, for example, agricultural byproducts, but also waste, is an extremely important process that, again, we're pioneering in Canada. If biofuels is at the kind of, on the short-term part of the horizon, something that we can get our heads around and hands actually around today, then I would say hydrogen is maybe I wouldn't say at the other extreme, because it is clearly on the horizon, and we can already see how a hydrogen economy could develop. But it is something that is a little bit further out there, because the technology also on the OEM side still needs to be, developed further, needs to be fine-tuned further. It basically exists in principle at the moment, but it needs kind of more work for developing it and fine-tuning it, so that we're probably looking at something like a 5 to 10 year horizon, as opposed to a 2 to 3 year horizon, I would say, on the hydrogen side. I would definitely say there is a very, very good case for hydrogen becoming a key building block of a no carbon future. In particular, if we factor in, and we all do, I think, the question is by when, we factor in the abundance or an abundance of renewable energy, which is currently obviously being built up and which will play a key role in making hydrogen a really competitive, no carbon fuel.
Shell has recently released a report based on research on decarbonization in the road freight sector specifically. Why is it important for road freight to decarbonize, first of all?
Well, I think road freight today, in today's world, looking at the global picture for a second, makes up between 8 to 10% of the planet's CO2 emissions, which makes it one of the biggest sectors in terms of CO2 emissions. So that is something that I think we all need to get our heads around. And I see it for my role and my team and my business and our customers as a fundamentally important recognition, a starting point for, what the magnitude of the task is ahead of us. And it's not only that it's big today. Road transport, along with economic development, as we've seen in the past, will continue to grow. Some people say will even double by 2050, which means that if we continue on the trajectory that we're on now, emissions would even further increase, perhaps by some 60% or so, if we did nothing. Now, that is clearly a call to action for the entire sector, because that is not under everything we know about global warming and the accords of the Paris Agreement. That is not something that we can allow. We actually need to decrease emissions significantly by 80% by 2050 and by 30% even by 2030. So we have a clear task ahead of us that we need to get to in the road transport sector. So that is something that really drives this entire decarbonization. That's what makes road transport such an exciting area to work in, because obviously it's vital. It's a vital part of the economy for all of us. We all depend on it. Wherever we live, whatever we do, we all depend on goods being moved back and forth. But we also know that it has a significant CO2 footprint. So we need to act with urgency. If we want to do this in the most efficient and most importantly, the fastest, because the planet demands urgency in the fastest way, we have to do it together. Coalitions, different holders of the so-called value chain coming together. So the truck manufacturers, the logistics companies, the shippers, their customers. Think about, big consumer goods companies, for example, the infrastructure and energy providers like ourselves, but also the regulator. Really, really, in my mind, have to come together to understand that we all hold pieces of the puzzle, and we can only solve that puzzle, certainly in the fastest way, if we, get together and basically put those pieces together in a concerted, in a joint action. Canada is, from what I see, is very serious in this space. I mean, we're talking about a $1.5 billion investment in low and no carbon technologies that I see in the recent climate plan of the Canadian government. We were talking earlier about some of the initiatives in the transport space. So it is very good to see that this momentum is there. We talked about some of the opportunities in the biofuel space, which clearly I think we have a big interest in to translate into offers also for road transport customers. We talked about the opportunities and the piloting actually of sites, and we're talking about the Alberta initiative here on the hydrogen side, and there will be many more, I'm sure.
Final question. If you had 30 seconds to pitch to someone in a position of power in Canada so that we can decarbonize our country's industries, who would you choose to pitch and what would you say in 30 seconds?
Well, I would say let us bring together the companies and actors and individuals who have real accountability in this decarbonization space, who can contribute and commit to specific actions to change the sector or the sectors to make it lower carbon. And then give us a target. Give us a target and give us clarity on rules and incentives. And then I think by then coalitions emerging around that, we will be able to drive change. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And I think we can, if I think back to what many societies, I would say, I'm deliberately not saying just governments, because I think it's been societies, not just governments, who in the era of COVID have really gone beyond what anyone ever thought possible. To be honest, even a year ago, if we take that mindset and that spirit of delivery and everyone chipping in to help deliver a common and larger goal, if we take that, we can make decarbonization a reality in many sectors, even in sectors where we think it's impossible or very difficult today. We will be able to do it. I'm absolutely sure of that.